Biography of Sheikh Al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Was he suffering from the ruling political system? His qualities and morals since the emergence of the Islamic message and its spread in the world. Part 5. We continue to narrate a stage in the life of Sheikh Al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. On the same day, Ibn Taymiyyah declared a fatwa which exempted Mamluk soldiers from fasting during Ramadan so that they could preserve their strength. Within 2 days, the Mongols were severely crushed and the battle was won, thus ending Mongol control of Syria. These incidents greatly increased the scholarly prestige and social stature of Ibn Taymiyyah amongst the masses, despite opposition from the establishment clergy. He would soon be appointed as the chief professor of the elite scholarly institute, Kamiliya Dar al-Hadith. Ibn Taymiyyah's 3 unprecedented fatwas, legal verdicts, that excommunicated the Ilkhanate authorities and their supporters as apostates over their neglect to govern by Sharia, Islamic law, and preference of the traditional Mongol imperial code of Yasa, would form the theological basis of 20th century Islamist and jihadist scholars and ideologues. Reviving Ibn Taymiyyah's fatwas during the late 20th century, jihadist ideologues like Sayyid Qutb, Abd al-Salam al-Faraj, Abdullah Azzam, Usama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, etc. made public takfir, excommunication, of contemporary governments of the Muslim world and called for their revolutionary overthrow through armed jihad. Ibn Taymiyyah was a fervent polemicist who zealously launched theological refutations against various religious sects such as the Sufis, Jamites, Asharites, Shias, Falsafa, etc., labeling them as heretics responsible for the crisis of Mongol invasions across the Islamic world. He was imprisoned several times for conflicting with the prevailing opinions of the jurists and theologians of his day. A judge from the city of Wasit, Iraq, requested that Ibn Taymiyyah write a book on creed. His subsequent creedal work, Al-Aqidah al-Wasitiyah, caused him trouble with the authorities. Ibn Taymiyyah adopted the view that God should be described as he was literally described in the Quran and in the Hadith, and that all Muslims were required to believe this because according to him it was the view held by the early Muslim community, Salaf. Within the space of 2 years, 1305 to 1306, 4 separate religious council hearings were held to assess the correctness of his creed. The first hearing was held with Ash'ari scholars who accused Ibn Taymiyyah of anthropomorphism. At the time, Ibn Taymiyyah was 42 years old. He was protected by the then governor of Damascus, Akish al-Afram, during the proceedings. The scholars suggested that he accept that his creed was simply that of the Hanbalites and offered this as a way out of the charge. However, if Ibn Taymiyyah ascribed his creed to the Hanbali school of law, then it would be just one view out of the 4 schools which one could follow rather than a creed everybody must adhere to. In compromising, Ibn Taymiyyah maintained that it was obligatory for all scholars to adhere to his creed. 2 separate councils were held a year later on January 22 and 28, 1306. The first council was in the house of the governor of Damascus, Akish al-Afram, who had protected him the year before when facing the Shafi scholars. A second hearing was held 6 days later where the Indian scholar Safi al-Din al-Hindi found him innocent of all charges and accepted that his creed was in line with the Quran and the Sunnah. Regardless, in April 1306 the chief Islamic judges of the Mamluk state declared Ibn Taymiyyah guilty and he was incarcerated. He was released 4 months later in September. After his release in Damascus, the doubts regarding his creed seemed to have resolved, but this was not the case. A Shafi scholar, Ibn al-Sarsari, was insistent on starting another hearing against Ibn Taymiyyah which was held once again at the house of the governor of Damascus, al-Afram. His book Al-Aqidah al-Wasitiyah was still not found at fault. At the conclusion of this hearing, Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Sarsari were sent to Cairo to settle the problem. His debate on anthropomorphism and his imprisonment on the arrival of Ibn Taymiyyah and the Shafi'ite scholar in Cairo in 1306, an open meeting was held. The Mamluk Sultan at the time was al-Nasir Muhammad and his deputy attended the open meeting. Ibn Taymiyyah was found innocent. Despite the open meeting, objections regarding his creed continued and he was summoned to the citadel in Cairo for a munazara, legal debate, which took place on April 8, 1306. During the munazara, His views on divine attributes, specifically whether a direction could be attributed to God, were debated by the Indian scholar Safi al-Din al-Hindi in the presence of Islamic judges. Ibn Taymiyyah failed to convince the judges of his position and so was incarcerated for the charge of anthropomorphism on the recommendation of al-Hindi. Thereafter, he together with his two brothers were imprisoned in the citadel of the mountain, Qa'at al-Jabal, in Cairo until September 25, 1307. He was freed due to the help he received from two emirs, Salar and Muhanna ibn Isa, but he was not allowed to go back to Syria. He was then again summoned for a legal debate, but this time he convinced the judges that his views were correct and he was allowed to go free. Ibn Taymiyyah continued to face troubles for his views which were found to be at odds with those of his contemporaries. His strong opposition to what he believed to be religious innovations caused upset among the prominent Sufis of Egypt including Ibn Ata'Allah and Karim al-Din al-Amuli, and the locals who started to protest against him. Their main contention was Ibn Taymiyyah's stance on tawassul, intercession. In his view, a person could not ask anyone other than God for help except on the Day of Judgment when intercession in his view would be possible. At the time, the people did not restrict intercession to just the Day of Judgment but rather they said it was allowed in other cases. Due to this, Ibn Taymiyyah, now aged 45, was ordered to appear before the Shafi'i judge Badr al-Din in March 1308 and was questioned on his stance regarding intercession. Thereafter, he was incarcerated in the prison of the judges in Cairo for some months. After his release, he was allowed to return to Syria, should he so wish. Ibn Taymiyyah, however, stayed in Egypt for a further 5 years. House arrest in Alexandria 1309, the year after his release, saw a new Mamluk sultan accede to the throne, Baybars al-Jashnikar. His reign, marked by economical and political unrest, only lasted a year. In August 1309, Ibn Taymiyyah was taken into custody and placed under house arrest for 7 months in the new sultan's palace in Alexandria. He was freed when al-Nasir Muhammad retook the position of sultan on March 4, 1310. Having returned to Cairo a week later, he was received by al-Nasir. The sultan would sometimes consult Ibn Taymiyyah on religious affairs and policies during the rest of his 3-year stay in Cairo. During this time he continued to teach and wrote his famous book Al-Kitab al-Siyasa al-Shari'ah, Treatise on the Government of the Religious Law, a book noted for its account of the role of religion in politics. He spent his last 15 years in Damascus. Aged 50, Ibn Taymiyyah returned to Damascus via Jerusalem on February 28, 1313. Damascus was now under the governorship of Tankis. There, Ibn Taymiyyah continued his teaching role as professor of Hanbali fiqh. This is when he taught his most famous student, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, who went on to become a noted scholar in Islamic history. Ibn Qayyim was to share in Ibn Taymiyyah's renewed persecution. 3 years after his arrival in the city, Ibn Taymiyyah became involved in efforts to deal with the increasing Shia influence amongst Sunni Muslims. An agreement had been made in 1316 between the Emir of Mecca and the Ilkhanid ruler Oljaitu, brother of Ghazan Khan, to allow a favorable policy towards Shi'ism in the city. Around the same time, the Shia theologian al-Hilli, who had played a crucial role in the Mongol ruler's decision to make Shi'ism the state religion of Persia, wrote the book Manhaj al-Karama, The Way of Charisma, which dealt with the Shia doctrine of the Imamate and also served as a refutation of the Sunni doctrine of the Caliphate. In response, Ibn Taymiyyah wrote his famous book Manhaj as-Sunnah and Nabawiyya as a refutation of al-Hilli's work. In 1318, Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a treatise that would curtail the ease with which a Muslim man could divorce his wife. Ibn Taymiyyah's fatwa on divorce was not accepted by the majority of scholars of the time, and this continued into the Ottoman era. However, almost every modern Muslim nation-state has come to adopt Ibn Taymiyyah's position on this issue of divorce. At the time he issued the fatwa, Ibn Taymiyyah revived an edict by the Sultan not to issue fatwas on this issue, but he continued to do so, saying, "I cannot conceal my knowledge." As in previous instances, he stated that his fatwa was based on the Quran and Hadith. His view on the issue was at odds with the Hanbali position. This proved controversial among the people in Damascus as well as the Islamic scholars who opposed him on the issue. According to the scholars of the time, an oath of divorce counted as a full divorce, and they were also of the view that 3 oaths of divorce taken under one occasion counted as 3 separate divorces. The significance of this was that a man who divorces the same partner 3 times is no longer allowed to remarry that person until and if that person marries and divorces another person. Only then could the man, who took the oath, remarry his previous wife. Ibn Taymiyyah accepted this but rejected the validity of 3 oaths taken under one sitting to count as 3 separate divorces as long as the intention was not to divorce. Moreover, Ibn Taymiyyah was of the view that a single oath of divorce uttered but not intended also does not count as an actual divorce. He stated that since this is an oath much like an oath taken in the name of God, a person must expiate for an unintentional oath in a similar manner. Due to his views and also by not abiding to the Sultan's letter 2 years before forbidding him from issuing a fatwa on the issue, 3 council hearings were held, in as many years, 1318, 1319 and 1320, to deal with this matter. The hearing were overseen by the Viceroy of Syria, Tankis. This resulted in Ibn Taymiyyah being imprisoned on August 26, 1320, in the citadel of Damascus. He was released about 5 months and 18 days later, on February 9, 1321, by order of the Sultan al-Nasir. Ibn Taymiyyah was reinstated as teacher of Hanbali law and he resumed teaching. His Risala on visits to tombs and his final imprisonment in 1310, Ibn Taymiyyah had written a Risala, treatise, called Ziyarat al-Qabr, or according to another source, Shad al-Riyal. It dealt with the validity and permissibility of making a journey to visit the tombs of prophets and saints. It is reported that in the book, he condemned the cult of saints and declared that traveling with the sole purpose of visiting Muhammad's grave was a blameworthy religious innovation. For this, Ibn Taymiyyah was imprisoned in the citadel of Damascus 16 years later on July 18, 1326, aged 63, along with his student Ibn Qayyim. The Sultan also prohibited him from issuing any further fatwas. Hanbali scholar Ahmad ibn Umar al-Maqdisi accused Ibn Taymiyyah of apostasy over the treatise. Ibn Taymiyyah referred to his imprisonment as a divine blessing. During his incarceration, he wrote that, when a scholar forsakes what he knows of the Book of God and of the Sunnah of his Messenger and follows the ruling of a ruler which contravenes a ruling of God and his Messenger, he is a renegade, an unbeliever who deserves to be punished in this world and in the hereafter. I stop at this point today. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the world's incredible stories. Soon we will publish Part 6. Thank you for watching.